Right, while we wait for some more people to join us, I will just start by giving a brief introduction. My name's Trian. I work for Swansea University. We're joined this evening by Cerys Davis, who is a lecturer with us in the School of Law, Hilary Rodham Clinton School of Law at Swansea University. Thank you, Cerys, for joining us tonight on this subject of should we be able to shut people down? Did I get the title right? Sorry, I've immediately blanked on the title.
You did. No, that's absolutely right. Yes.
Should we be able to shut people down? It's a fantastic session. I hope you'll enjoy it. We'll see if anyone else joins us in the next couple of minutes. We've started extremely promptly, but I will hand over to Cerys. Thank you very much, Cerys. Diolch.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. Croeso I chi. A noswaith dda, good evening. As Rhian said, I'm a lecturer in law at Swansea University, and I teach tort law, which, unless you've done any law before, that'll be meaningless for you. But also criminal law, which you're more likely to have heard of. Now, this isn't a law session as such. But if anyone does have any law-related questions, perhaps at the end, if we've got time, I'm happy to help Rhian or to answer them. So this evening's session isn't subject specific in terms of anything legal, and its aims are twofold. So firstly, we're going to look at a topic of ongoing controversy. It's one that's not going away anytime soon. And as Rhian suggested, the title is Should We Be Able to Shut People Down? But the other aim is not just so much the topic, the subject matter, but also using that topic to engage thinking skills. So skills of analysis, skills of evaluation, and looking at the broader implications of a particular question. Now, the reason I wanted to do that is because this is one area we as university lecturers, as academics, it's one skill that we really value. And it's one of those skills that really make the difference to the quality of undergraduate work. Now, I'm guessing that many of you will want to enter further education, and presumably I've got a cross-section of students here hoping to follow different disciplines. And although I'm currently a law lecturer, before that I was a practicing solicitor, so a lawyer by trade. Before that, I was a police officer. So obviously I do have a particular perspective when considering the value of skills. But regardless of my own discipline, being able to marshal arguments and then to analyse and evaluate them, and to do so in a broader context, is really important. It'll be important in your academic studies, but it goes beyond that. As students who are ambitious, who have aspirations to be the leaders, the decision makers of the future, the ability to look beyond the immediate and to acknowledge wider, broader implications is crucial. Now, that ability, that skill, isn't necessarily one that we are born with. In fact, instinctively, our individual views or perspectives on something are often derived from self-interest. What is good for me in the here and now, or for people like me in the here and now? But good leaders, good decision makers, have learned not to deny their own instinctive views, but to acknowledge that those views perhaps are their own, they're instinctive. And before making a decision, before landing on a viewpoint, pause and consider the issue in a broader context and look for those implications of that decision that might not be apparent at first glance. Now, you'll forgive me if I just come back a little bit from a university perspective. I have many students who, following an assessment, will ask, well, look, why was this piece of work, why was this essay not a first class, not at the higher end of the grade? And very often, my response will be that whilst the work showed good knowledge and understanding of the topic, the essay didn't demonstrate a deeper understanding of the wider implications of a point of view or of an argument. The student hasn't gone beyond their first thought, the first position. They haven't examined it and haven't acknowledged a competing argument, or how their first instinct might have different or wider consequences. So hopefully this exercise today will get you to think about that, think about broader evaluation. Now, all of that sounds a bit heavy, I know, but don't worry, because I'm going to be using using someone that hopefully you'll all be familiar with to kick us off here. Now, as I've said, we're using a situation or a topic that's very topical, and hopefully some of you will remember what happened in the first week of January this year in the US. If not, let's have a reminder. Now remember, outgoing President Donald Trump continued to maintain that it was he who had actually won the presidential election. And he, in this clip, is addressing a protest march of his supporters in Washington. Now, I'm not very good at editing, so I'll be doing this on the hoof, and hopefully you'll pick up the little bit. It's not a long clip, a little bit of the video.
More, and that's what this is all about.
Let's go back a little bit.
Let's have trial by combat.
All of us here today do not want to see our election victory stolen by emboldened radical left Democrats, which is what they're doing, and stolen by the fake news media. That's what they've done and what they're doing. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved. Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore. And that's what.
Right, so I'll pause it there. So what followed that speech was the storming of the Capitol building and the deaths of 5 individuals as a result. It was a very serious incident. Trump's comments.
What this is all about.
Sorry, Trump's comments were very, very strong, very bombastic. And there's an example of one of them on the screen here. Now, obviously, this was reported around the world, and the incident itself widely condemned. But what I want to use as the basis of what we're looking at, a discussion today, is the reaction of some of the social media platforms. Now, we all know how fond Donald Trump was of communicating via social media, especially via Twitter. But swiftly after the storming of Congress, this is what followed. Donald Trump was banned. First of all, he was banned from Twitter, and then banned from Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Snapchat. Now, the Twitter ban is permanent. YouTube have said they would revisit the ban once any risk of violence had decreased. Yesterday's news confirmed that Facebook and Instagram have been advised by their independent advisory or oversight board not to reinstate his accounts, but to revisit the situation in 6 months. But in the interim period, he remains banned or suspended and unable to use those social media platforms. He is therefore effectively deplatformed. Now, just to get a sense of what you think, can you pop, if I'm quick enough to get this poll up, can you pop in this poll, either yes or no, as to whether you think Twitter, Facebook, Instagram were right to ban Trump? So just put either a yes or a no, and let's see what response we get. Yes, they were right to ban him. No, they weren't. So we'll wait for a few more. It's not a test. It's just an expression of your opinion. It'd be good to have it. 5 more seconds, and then I'll end the poll. Okay, so I'll end the poll now and share the results. So, of the audience today or tonight, as you can see, we've got about 87% of those thinking that yes, instinctively, or your view is that it was right for those social media platforms to deplatform, to ban Trump. Now, that obviously reflects the wider, sorry, let me just get out of this, the wider views of society generally. So some were in complete agreement with the banning, others, including but not limited to Trump supporters, were up in arms. There was considerable reference to Trump being deprived of his rights. So the first thing worth doing this evening is just to try and be clear on what rights might mean in this context. Now, some of you may well have a good understanding of rights as a concept, but we do need to be precise. We need to distinguish between the use of the word right in our day-to-day language and enforceable rights, which is really what we're talking about here. So we may often refer to having a right to something or other. I hear it from my children all the time, quite regularly, about what they've got the right to do. I've got a right to go on the Xbox. I've got a right to go out when I want, or I've got a right to not have to go to bed at such and such time. But what we're interested in is enforceable rights. So those rights that we consider should be protected by law, protected legally. Now, this isn't a human rights session today, obviously, but it is, as part of looking at this topic, worth understanding whether there is a right, an enforceable right involved here, and if so, what that right or those rights might be. So, a quick question. Which, if any, of the following European Convention on Human Rights may be relevant here? Now, I'll give you a minute to think as I'm reading them out. There's no need to put anything in chat unless you want to, but I would like you to decide as we're going through them what rights you think may be relevant to this question of banning Donald Trump from social media. So firstly, the right to private and family life, it's Article 8. The right to freedom of thought, Article 9. The right to a fair trial. The right to freedom of expression. And the right to freedom from discrimination. So of those 5 there, just have a little think to yourselves, which rights do you think would be relevant to this topic? I will just quickly check chat in case anybody has put anything in. By the way, if you put any particular questions in chat, bear in mind I won't be addressing them until at the end because I can't, not very good at multitasking. Okay, so no questions in chat. Right. So in terms of the rights which might be involved, if we're looking at deplatforming someone, the answer is that all of these might be relevant. The obvious one that we might recognise as being clearly potentially impacted is the right to freedom of expression. So D on your screens, the right to say what you think. But in addition, the right to private and family life, well, that includes your right to participate in society. And if you consider that access to social media is key to that participation in today's society, then depriving somebody of that access may well indirectly be impacting on this right to private and family life. In addition, C, there is right to a fair trial. Why might that be relevant? Well, if social media is used against you, then that might adversely affect public perception. What is said in the media can prejudice an outcome of a trial and can call into question whether any subsequent legal proceedings were fair. So it could be a knock-on effect of denying someone access to social media if social media is used by others against them. Freedom of thought, obviously that includes the right to manifest, practice, display your beliefs, and the right to be free from discrimination includes discrimination on the basis of gender, race, and age, but also on the grounds of political or other opinion. So potentially, if you're being discriminated against, if you're being banned or deplatformed on the basis of a political viewpoint or other opinion, potentially that's discriminatory. But if you recall, the starting point of today's discussion is going to be not generally human rights, but Trump and his social media bans and suspensions. So let's get back to that and let's look at the first task I would like you to get involved in today, which is to get you to think about taking one of the two sides set out on the slide here. So our semi-fictional situation, and I say semi-fictional because in 6 months' time, it's likely that Facebook will be making this decision. So the situation is that you have been asked to present to Facebook's board of directors 3 arguments why, and you're either going to take the Group A viewpoint, why Trump should be permanently banned. At the moment, he's suspended, why he should be permanently banned from Facebook. And then I'd like also some people to take the perspective of Group B and come up with 3 arguments why Trump should not be banned permanently from Facebook. Now, the only rules here is that I would like you to find the at least one argument for that particular perspective that you have chosen, and that you stick with that perspective from the time being in your head. So not try and juggle 2 sides, but just try and maintain one perspective and come up with some arguments. Now, as you're thinking, as we're talking, you can pop those in chat so that I can collate them. Now, there are good reasons for me asking you to adopt the approach of deciding which side you're on and sticking with it for the time being, especially for anybody who's interested in a career in law. Because as a lawyer, your duty is to represent your client. Now, sometimes you will agree with your client's perspective, and sometimes you won't. But either way, you have to argue your client's case, regardless of your own viewpoint. So, as you're deciding which group you're going to elect to be part of, consider what your instinct is drawing you towards. Maybe challenge that by challenge yourself to go the other way, because I'm hoping to elicit enough views from both perspectives. Now, if we were in a more interactive setting, this is where I might put you in breakout groups to have a discussion amongst yourselves as to some of the arguments you might put forward. But what I'm going to do is give you a couple of minutes to pop in chat, please, any arguments that you've got. If you can put, if you're group A, or that's one of the arguments you're coming up with, if you can put a capital A first and then your argument or your comment or your point. If you're putting forth an argument as to why Trump should not be banned, put B first and then your argument, and I will monitor chat and hopefully see some comments coming up. Okay, so we've got one, thank you. I'm going to collate all of these in a minute. Thank you for the second comment, because otherwise this gets quite tedious. Everybody else is waiting. So don't worry, don't overthink it. Just let's have some comments. This is, you know, as university students, this is what you're going to be needing to do. Throw it out there. Good. Now, I can see that some of you have already gone, which is great, to the broader context. So let's have a look, first of all, at Trump-specific arguments. One argument that has been made here from the perspective of banning Trump was, well, he incited violence through his freedom of expression. So Trump has used these platforms to incite violence. He's dangerous, and therefore that is one argument why he should be permanently banned. Another argument specific to Trump is that allowing Trump to post anything he wants to post can have a negative influence on anybody who views those posts. And I think, yes, inadvertently responsible for the deaths of individuals because of what he has chosen to say. And if that is permitted on social media platforms, that could have dire consequences. And in terms of then opposing views, we have comments regarding the fact that he is entitled to freedom of expression. Then there's the wider implications, which I'll come on to, about how that might impact on others. A related argument is that he was only talking about, or his perspective was misunderstood. And so why should he be banned? Because of the perceptions or the way that other people take what he's said. And again, very Trump specific, don't ban. Through inciting violence, the public can see how dangerous he can be and he may lose support. Excellent. So maybe banning brings with it a kind of a notoriety, whereas allowing people to say foolish things and for everyone to see that, or in this case, dangerous things, perhaps that works to actually make people realize how dangerous someone can be. So let's then have a look at, so I picked out, to be fair, the we'll skip this slide, but I picked out the ones that were Trump related, and some of you have gone further, which is exactly where I was headed with tonight's topic, and looked at, well, what would be the wider implications? Because again, with Trump has always been very much a divisive individual and character. Those that support Trump love Trump. Those that dislike him have a strong dislike for him. Those that admire him will overlook what he said or will put a positive slant on it. Those that don't like Trump's politics, well, as far as they're concerned, Trump can do no right. So that's the difficulty with basing a decision purely on the man, on the individual. And before Facebook's board of directors come to a decision in 6 months' time as regards Donald Trump, they will, of course, have to see the issue very much in its wider context. And the wider implications of banning, some of you have already gone there, you've already mentioned some of these. But one of the wider implications of deplatforming people is whether you can do so fairly. Can you be consistent in banning or deplatforming somebody? It might seem justified in the context of Donald Trump, the storming of the Capitol building, etc., to suspend or to ban him. But if you do so, you really need to think about whether you can adopt that approach consistently in terms of being fair to all users. Because if you can't, the danger, and remember, if you're on the Facebook's board of directors, you have a concern about your business. One concern is whether Facebook loses the respect and the trust of users. If you feel that individuals are being treated unfairly, that there is a lack of consistency, that Facebook is somehow banning people of a particular political persuasion, but is not being consistent, is not being fair, Facebook can lose respect, can lose trust of the users that it needs in order to fuel its business. There's also the issue of where you draw the line. What comment goes beyond the line and leads an individual to the possibility of being deplatformed, and what comment might fall short of being objectionable enough. How many comments does an individual have to post before they are considered dangerous or that it's justified to deplatform them? Is that one comment? Is it 10 comments? Is it 100 posts? So how is that decision going to be made so that it is fair and consistent for all users? And this was a point that some of you raised in your in the chat, which was that there is a danger that in taking a broad brush sweeping approach, if somebody says something on social media we don't like, or it's objectionable, or it's of a political view that is unpalatable, the danger is that you drive that messaging underground. You don't get rid of those groups, you don't get rid of that message, you don't get rid of that view, but what you do is drive it onto other platforms. And those platforms may have less or no safeguards or no monitoring. Banning and deplatforming, and this was another point that somebody made in chat, can also reduce the scope for correcting fake news or challenging disturbing views when that message is only being shared amongst a closed group or on a site where everyone is already of the same view. And that then can be self-perpetuating. And this is what happens if you drive messaging underground. If you allow people to have their say on these platforms, then it allows, as somebody put it, others to see how ridiculous they are, or to challenge the view, or to correct the view. Think in terms of current the current situation we're in about the anti-vaxxers. Will they change their view if they were banned or deplatformed, or will they just set up their own groups where anybody that's of that view is going to live that story, live that narrative, live that truth, won't be questioned on it, and therefore does that perpetuate the same disturbing or wrong or views that should be challenged. So there are wider implications if you ban or deplatform an individual like Trump, in terms of if you are then having to be consistent, whether that leads you into unwelcome territory. Likewise, there are wider implications of not banning or deplatforming. Again, you were looking at Trump. Allowing someone like that to have unfettered access and posts on social media might give the impression that the messaging, and let's step away from Trump, but any unpalatable messaging is okay. Does it give credence? Does it give the impression that that's a valid view to hold, or that lots of people hold that view? Is that the impression that allowing people to have free reign on social media platforms can have? If you don't have some kind of fetter, some kind of line threshold in terms of freedom of expression, freedom of speech, does that mean that violence can be promoted, can be encouraged? We think we know where we would draw the line. We think we know what's right and what oversteps the mark. But if there are no fetters, if there are no holds barred on posts or individuals suggesting, inciting, hinting at violence, can that encourage that kind of behaviour amongst the wider groups? Allowing anything to be posted on Facebook, or not necessarily anything, but allowing messages to be posted time and time and time again, can also desensitize users to the stupidity of the message, the ridiculousness of the message, or the unpalatable nature of the message. Even if we don't agree with a message, if we see it time and time and time again being posted by individuals, does that normalize that message? And is there a danger inherent in that? So do users become desensitized over time? And this is something that is often discussed, the idea that, or the possibility that misleading information, and whilst Trump was very much in favor of calling out what he considered to be fake news, there's also sufficient evidence that on Trump-related sites, there was quite a bit of fake news posted there as well. And if we think again about anti-vaxxers as a current example, allowing people to have a social media presence, regardless of what they say, runs the risk of misleading information being shared. Now, we all think we recognize truth and would recognize fake news, but actually that's not what studies show. What studies have shown is that fake news is believed by more people than you would imagine. And so there is a real danger that misleading information is not just shared, but is believed, and given the reach of social media, can reach millions of users without any checks and balances in terms of the truth of that message. And as evidence of that, and there's plenty of studies on this, here's a particular study which did focus on social media and fake news in the presidential election of 2016, which Donald Trump won. And the purpose of that paper, and as you can see, the findings are laid out here. They looked at the evidence of the role of false stories that were circulated on social media in the lead up to the election and during the campaigns, and found that, and I've been selective here in what I've put on screen, of the known false stories that appeared in the 3 months before the election, those favouring Trump were shared a total of 30 million times on Facebook. 30 million times. That's a huge number. And in terms of that reach, just over half of those who were part of the study and who recalled seeing fake news stories had believed them. Now, if that was extrapolated out to the 30 million, the 30 million views, you can imagine how many actual beings potentially were influenced by what we now know to be fake news stories. So it's not an issue that has no victims here in terms of allowing people to post whatever they want on social media. What I'm interested in is, as we've been talking, and as perhaps you've been seeing others' comments in the chat, whether now you have changed your view from what you instinctively felt at the start, whether Trump should be banned or whether he shouldn't be banned. Have you changed your view? So if we just, again, just for interest, have a look at a yes, no, please. So if you changed your view as to whether Trump should be banned, put yes. If you didn't, put no. I'll just give it a few more seconds. Okay, and let's bring it to an end there. So I'm not going to pretend that this poll is particularly scientific, given the small nature of our study, but 3 of you have at least been honest and said, well, whatever my view was at the start, having heard other perspectives, maybe having considered wider implications, having thought about it beyond Trump himself, I have changed my view. And that's really what I wanted to get at in this session. Not a sense that you necessarily have to change your view, but that whenever you acknowledge what your initial instinctive reaction to something is, that you do pause and that you consider, hang on, that's okay for that individual, or that's okay in those circumstances. I hold with that view, but what might be the other side of the coin? What might be the other arguments? And if I give them proper consideration, does that change anything that I think? So let me shut that down. So in terms of that, I very much geared this towards Trump because he's such a divisive character and he's sort of a bit extreme, and because yesterday there was the Facebook, Instagram announcement. But those of you that have formed your view one way or the other, would that change if we were talking not about Donald Trump, but about incidences like this? Now, a few days after the Trump incident and the Trump ban, it might have been the week after, this hit the news. More online abuse targeted at Marcus Rashford and others, but Marcus Rashford with his high profile, this is why obviously it made the news, but more online abuse about footballers, about others. So if we forget about what Trump posts, what about people that post online abuse like this? sorry, let me go back. Bearing in mind that all of the issues we looked at when we were looking at wider implications are still relevant, no matter who you're thinking of banning, who you're thinking of deplatforming. But for those that felt that we shouldn't ban individuals or deplatform them when we were talking about Trump, what about people who post online abuse about others? And it would be great to have some comments in chat about your views as to whether those that post hate speech, whether it's discriminatory on the grounds of race, or whether it's discriminatory on the grounds of gender. Do you feel the same about banning or not banning? There's a good comment there. Hate speech may lead to a change in the law that addresses sexism and racism. So does that suggest, as far as you're concerned, and I'm not expecting an individual answer, although you're welcome to give one, does that suggest then that there's that tie-in with not wanting these comments to go underground? So look, give them the ability, these individuals, to say these dreadful things, so that people can see what's being said, can see what goes on, and therefore a change in the law might be encouraged. I think that's probably what you mean. And again, there's validity in that argument. The kind of validity that says, well, look, if we just keep banning people, there'll just be more people doing it. But those that are really dangerous, those that have something to say, are going to say it anyway, but in those darker areas where there is no monitoring and where they can get away with perhaps saying far worse. But another very, let me just scroll back up here. And yes, individual comments can have a wide reach. And yes, we can feel sorry for people who post this kind of hate. And obviously they are coming from a bad place, otherwise you don't do that kind of thing. However, does this tie in with we have to be very careful that if we permit this drip feed of these kind of comments, even if as users we don't acknowledge them, or we think we're not acknowledging them, we pass them by, but is this constant drip feed of vile hatred or dangerous views, does that start to normalize it? And does it, amongst certain sectors, make it more acceptable? Is there a real danger there that we need to counter by banning? Good. I know that you can all read far quicker than I can, probably, the comments in chat, but there's some really excellent points made. And one of the things somebody mentioned, I think, if anyone is rude or offensive, but that's an interesting point, isn't it? Because I'm making assumptions here that you all use social media, and I'm guessing that you do. And if you do, I've no doubt that probably every one of you has come across posts that you consider unacceptable, unpleasant, offensive, or inflammatory. But it's an interesting question, isn't it, to try and assess where you would draw the line. We can look at certain comments which are clearly, hate speech, racist, sexist, and we might be able to clearly put those into a category where we feel that those posting that should be banned. But what about comments that are offensive What about comments about individuals? Because you made that point about an individual that goes to their physical appearance, whether they've put on weight, whether they've lost weight, what they look like in that article of clothing, whether they're short, whatever it might be. If it's done to cause offence, where does that sit? Is that freedom of expression that should be permitted? And how would a control mechanism decide where that line is to be drawn? And that again is something that Facebook would have to consider if they went down the route of looking more widely at taking away the right of people to use social media platforms. Is, well, if I'm a nasty piece of work who just likes poking fun at or being mean about celebrities, should I be banned? Do celebrities have a different status to others, non-celebrity users? How far should I be permitted to go before I get deplatformed? And who makes that call? Again, bearing in mind the rights we looked at. In my opinion, the fact that these ideas are public means that people find them normal. So setting an example by banning people who spread this abuse could be a good thing. Yeah. And again, very recently, very topical, of course, it was last weekend, wasn't it, when there was a sports blackout. Well, some sports did a blackout on social media for this very reason, to send a very clear message that enough is enough. We're not putting up with this anymore. But of course, it was a temporary blackout. And although I haven't looked since, I wonder whether things have gone quiet, or whether they will just start up again when the football teams, the rugby teams, etc., have their usual online presence. And there's a good point here, especially coming from myself as a lawyer. Clearly, if the law changes, so will behaviour. And yes, there's some evidence that is the case. In terms of our discrimination legislation, there is evidence that whilst people's attitudes over time might well change, the time it takes for society to change attitudes is that much longer than it is when a law comes in to force a change in attitude. People may feel the same as they did before, but they curb their behaviours in accordance with the law because they have to. And that means that over time, over a shorter period of time, societal attitudes towards that change. So it's a quicker method of achieving the desired result. Yes, giving beliefs a public platform is undoubtedly dangerous. The question becomes, who is then policing what viewpoints are unpalatable, what viewpoints should be taken off social media, and what viewpoints are allowed to remain. And yes, what if instead of banning, we teach? Because banning can breed anger from the commenter, which is never a good thing. Yeah, that's another, if we really, really want to change attitudes, isn't education perhaps a better tool than removing somebody's access to other people, access to voicing their view? If people feel then they don't have a voice, they can't be heard, does that make their behaviour worse? Of course, the difficulty is that it's all fine and well to talk about educating people, and hopefully we do that, we try to do it, but will that ever stop a very, very small minority who almost set out to cause offence, to be abusive? And as long as there are those in the minority, their voices can be amplified on social media. You know, one comment, it may only be one individual, but on social media, your reach, that voice can be amplified so loudly that it takes on far more significance than really it deserves. And yes, you're right. If certain platforms ban certain individuals or certain viewpoints, other platforms can spring up where they're not quite so fussy, and again geared towards a particular audience, and that can be even more dangerous because on those platforms there's no one to call that out. There's no one to say, oh, hang on, no, bang, out of order, that's not what we feel, we don't agree with that, you shouldn't be on this side. There's nobody to do that, to monitor it, to call it out. So drawing to a close in terms of the content then, and again we'll have a few minutes for any questions, or if you want to voice anything more on chat. But if you are interested in this as a topic, then this is a potential, a useful article here as a starting point, looking at the question of deplatforming, banning individuals from social media, and some of the arguments around that. Okay, do we have any points that anybody wants to make, comments you want to make, questions that you have? Thanks, Rhian, I can see that you've done that now.
Why is Swansea a good place to study law?
Okay, well, let's leave aside the university, the campus, fabulous, the location, and let's go to the Hilary Rodham School of Law. We offer not just a variety of optional modules. Now, wherever, if you're interested in a law degree, wherever you go, there are certain core modules you have to do. And you'll see that if you've done your research. You have to do them because for those that want to be solicitors, they have to have covered these modules. Aside from that, though, we offer a range of really, really interesting and very, very current modules. We've got a specialist now, cybercrime unit department at Swansea, for example, and obviously that is something that is a growing area in law, and one that a lot of our students elect to do as an optional module because it's so current, it's so up to date, and we are at the cutting edge of things like that. So we do offer a range of modules while you are an undergraduate, but also it's not just the academic modules. We offer experience and experiences. So we have a law clinic, a very, very vibrant law clinic. Now, what happens there is that students who want to can get involved in dealing with real clients. So well before they might make a decision whether they're going to be solicitors or not, they can get involved with real clients, real legal issues. We've got a miscarriage of justice teams that look at cases and focus on sifting through evidence and finding miscarriages of justice. We've got a very, very, because we've got a legal practice course, we've got a very close relationship with solicitors, practicing barristers who teach on our courses. So it's not just an academic discipline, but it's also something that will give you and upskill you in terms of legal skills. We also include skills modules which aren't credit bearing. So in other words, you don't get assessed on them. But again, they are there not just to look at the law, but to build your skills generally across the board. So what we try and do by the end of it is produce a rounded individual. Yes, someone that knows the law. Yes, someone that's had can have, if they choose to, some experience of the practical sides of law, but also someone, no matter what discipline you might end up in, what career you might end up in, you have developed transferable skills. So we're very, very passionate about ensuring that all our students aren't just too focused on the one thing, but are able to enter the world of work accompanied by a number of skills.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Cara. So we've got a couple other questions in the chat. What do you need to have or do to study law at university? Could I potentially study law with history, economics and politics A-levels?
Well, firstly, if what you're asking is, would you have had any previous experience of law at school? No, you would not, because very few schools actually can offer A-level law anyway. So that combination of subjects, history, economics and politics, would be fine. But so would Chem, Phys and Biol. You don't need any prior legal knowledge to embark on a law degree. What you do need is the willingness to learn, especially if it's a new subject, and you know, the other skills, communication skills are important, but those will be developed as you're on your undergraduate course. Just that final sentence, what does a lawyer and a solicitor's job consist of? Right, in the UK, or in England and Wales, I should say, and sometimes you hear on American television, they talk about lawyers, don't they? With us, we use the term lawyer to cover both solicitors and barristers. A solicitor, I could spend ages going through this, but I won't. I'm going to keep it very, very brief. A solicitor is usually the one in a solicitor's office that does all the background work, sees the client, sorts things out, drafts the contracts, deals with the client. A barrister works in court to represent those clients. So if you ever see anything on television where somebody's in court and somebody's standing there with a black coat on and a wig, that's a barrister. So lawyers in this country are either a solicitor or a barrister.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. All it leaves to say is thank you, Diolch Cerys, thank you for your time tonight, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you found the session useful. Even if you don't end up pursuing law, there's a really valuable skill is considering the other side of any argument in any discipline. It'll be an extremely valuable thing. So I hope you take that with you, because that's a vital skill at university for sure. But thank you, Cerys, for tonight. Thank you, everyone, for spending your evening with us. And we hope to see you again soon. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you.
Right, diolch. Thank you.